Hey, sports fans and fans of sport. How are we doing this week? We missed last week. We missed you all. Hugh, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you, Sean. How are you?
I'm doing very good. Very good. It's a very interesting week upcoming here on the Bearded Sports Channel. We have quite a bit to talk about today. There is a lot happening in the UFC world, and there's some big boys having a bit of a I don't know. What's another word for a fight? I was trying to think of something quite clever for fight.
Scrap?
Yeah.
Ruckus?
Bit of a scrap. Yeah. A bit of a brouhaha. Maybe that's what I was thinking. Possibly.
Okay.
We have, what do we have coming up here? And I actually didn't change the branding. There we go. Nobody noticed that.
No one knows. Well, we got UFC 60, Sean. UFC 60 is next weekend. So a week today, we will find out the results of that. And the headline fight, as we've just put up on the banner there, Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou. And this is their second fight, the rematch. They fought a couple of years ago. And I believe you've been doing some homework on it, Sean. Have you been looking at both of the fighters?
Yeah, so I started looking. I looked at, and again, I'm appreciative of the UFC for bringing in fighters to the new UFC fan with names that are really difficult to pronounce. I looked at Miocic second, and I went into it thinking, oh man, I had left it sort of the last minute to get myself caught up, and it took me no more than 3 minutes to watch the entirety of the last three Ngannou fights. And he scares the shit out of me.
I know, right?
He scares but it was an interesting evolution, because then I went to Miocic. Did I say that right? Yeah,
you did.
Miocic. And when I looked at his history, so this is from an outsider joining the UFC world. His last three fights were with the same guy, and it was Daniel Cormier, which I've only heard him speak. I've not seen him fight outside of the three fights against Miocic. And I also noted that Miocic hasn't fought that much in the last 3 years, really. I think his last three fights with the same guy, which I didn't know. But the first fight with Cormier, is it Cormier?
Yeah,
that's it. UFC people in the name.
DC, Daniel Cormier.
DC, really, really well. Because I thought at the beginning of that fight with Cormier, he was pretty much going to take Cormier out, and Cormier just kept hitting him with these jabs, just getting in close and just really quick hands. And then the next two fights were well fought, but I think it was pretty straightforward that Miocic won. And then I realized that Miocic before that had fought Ngannou. And in that fight, I remember thinking, because watching the Ngannou fights, because I watched the Ngannou fights before I actually found out there was a Miocic Ngannou won. Miocic took a strategy that none of the other fighters took in that fight. And again, I only saw it. I didn't hear the commentary. I haven't heard any of the analysis, but it looked like he was going to use his grappling as sort of his advantage in that fight, and pretty much took it to Ngannou onto the mat, tried to get control of him and not get into a striking bout with him. And I'm curious if that's what the next fight's going to be like.
Yeah, so let's bring any viewers up to speed that didn't watch the first fight. Rolling into that, Ngannou is undefeated. This guy from Africa, he moved from Cameroon, made his way up on an epic voyage of 18 months or 14 months to get up and make his way to Paris, France, where he was homeless, living on the streets and training, all of which was to become a professional boxer. And then he learned martial arts because they thought he was going to be really good at MMA, started making some money through fights, and then he's in the UFC. And he's knocking people out left, right, and center. And like you said, a scary guy. The heavyweight division starts at 205 and is capped at 265. He has to cut weight to come into 265. And Sean, he's not cut weight, like he's got fat to lose. Like he's a lean, rich 265. And one hell of a scary man. Like you said, his knockouts, like of Alistair Overeem, that fight where he does the uppercut and Alistair's chin goes up. He's a K1 world champion. That's a kickboxing, world-class kickboxer heavyweight guy that he knocked out there. So he's no mug on his feet. So he's been knocking people out left, right, and center, recorded the hardest punch in history. This guy's the African nightmare type of thing. And Stipe did exactly what needed to be done. Let's see what he's like on his back. Because Stipe is not renowned for his wrestling, although I can't remember whether he was all state. I don't know if you have that to hand, Sean, but I know that he's not a world-class wrestler, but he was an accomplished wrestler, at least at the state or national level.
Yeah.
But Stipe also went on to win, I think it was the Golden Gloves Award. So he's got a background of like boxing as well as wrestling. So he just took Ngannou down, and Ngannou was like, even for me, Sean, it was rudimentary what he could do. Like on his back, he looked helpless. I'm not joking you, but I would have been more accomplished at defending myself on my back with Stipe on me, technically wise. Ngannou looked like a lost boy, like on his back, and Stipe just leaned on him. He exposed him completely, and we then thought, well, this is Ngannou over now. The whole thing is done. Like the dream is over. We all know how to beat him. But Ngannou has then gone on a tear since one is, I think it was his last 3, to book a rematch with Miocic. So how much has he learned in that space of time? He's been working a lot on his wrestling and his ground game. So, and also his stand-up. So are we going to see something different or not? I'll give my predictions in a moment, but yeah, it's like no one knows right now. But what are your thoughts?
I'm struggling to pick because my heart tells me Ngannou. But watching Miocic, he's a very intelligent fighter. One thing I noticed with him, and I was saying to you earlier, he reminds me of Jan Blachowicz in the way he defends punches, because he's very good at making sure punches are glancing many times. And it's this thing where both those big men, they're always ready to move back and move back very quickly, not necessarily in like a I don't know, a good looking way, but you see their heads are always coming back, and it's real. Like whenever they read the punch coming, they just start moving back. They don't stand there, hold their ground, and counter. They're very selective about when they counter punch. And I think he's going to be spending quite a lot of time doing the same thing, just avoiding the striking and trying to get into a grappling match. And my concern with Ngannou is his fights have happened so quickly. Has he had the chance to learn how to take on somebody who is capable of grappling? And that was a problem he had, I felt, when I watched that other fight with Miocic, was, when Miocic had him down, there wasn't much he could do outside of just try to defend. He wasn't able to land. And I think Ngannou is going to be quite ready for that. I think he looks like he is a more sound puncher than he did in his first fight with Miocic. He was a bit wild in some of those movements. And I think he's got an economy of movement now that he didn't have before, which probably is why he's knocking people out much quicker. I'm finding it difficult, though, because Miocic has fought the same guy who's totally different, a shorter individual. This, Ngannou's the same height, similar reach, very imposing figure. I'm really struggling. It's a coin flip for me right now. But if anything, I'm leaning towards Ngannou having learned something and doing everything to stay out of a grappling match with Miocic.
So, yeah, great assessment, mate. My thoughts are that I've written off Stipe a few times, and at my peril. And he's someone that is like Jan Blachowicz, just largely overlooked as someone that just does the basics, the fundamentals so well, but is not the most powerful. He's not the fastest. He's technically not the sharpest, but he's just very good at all of those things. Like good wrestler, good at, like he's got it all, but we can kind of overlook his consistency and his way that he can adapt to styles. Now, one thing is undeniable is on paper, Stipe is currently going down as the world's greatest ever heavyweight. So on paper, and there's a reason I say on paper, there are heavyweights that have been more intimidating and more formidable and arguably more dominant during the fights that they've been in. For example, you've got Fedor, who was a Russian fighter who is, well, you see him, sure, he's one of the scariest guys. He's got his blue crystal eyes and he's got this death stare. It's like Hannibal Lecter. He would come down to the ring with like no emotion. And if he beat you up, he wouldn't show any emotion. He's like a cold killer. And he was undefeated for 10 years. And then he went into, I think it was Strikeforce, and fought Fabricio Verdum, and Verdum submitted him. The first guy to defeat him in 10 years. And up to that point, people are saying Fedor is like unbeatable. Now, Stipe beat the Doom to get the title. So he beat someone that beat the giant, like he was the giant killer, and then he beat the giant killer. He's beaten DC, who was, although he lost to John Jones at light heavyweight, DC used to fight at heavyweight and was undefeated. So he's beaten DC twice. He's beaten pretty much everyone that's been put in front of him. He's beaten all of the big names. And for that reason, and because he's held the heavyweight title for more consecutive times than anyone else, he's on paper the greatest ever. Although people will argue, I would argue, Cain Velasquez in his prime, who was DC's training partner, actually had more weapons, and I think he would have taken Stipe. But we can't prove that. I can't prove it. It's just hearsay. But so for that reason, I'm backing Stipe because everyone writes him off. I think that Ngannou is going to have improved, but in 3 years, he can't make up for the deficit he has had from Stipe's life of learning about that. So he could definitely get knocked out in the first round. Absolutely, because he got close to getting knocked out last time.
Yeah.
So if Francis touches him, he's in a world of trouble. But I think if he gets, the later this goes, the more and more trouble Francis is in because of his weight. Yeah. It's going to look bad for him. He really wants an early KO, 1 or 2 rounds. Otherwise, I've got to go Stipe. So I'm leaning Stipe.
I'm going to go. I think we're going to be going again on divergent paths on this. I'm going to go Ngannou cool. Second round. For me, I think he's, because I agree. I think if it goes past the second round, I think I'm going to be thinking I'm wrong here. The reason I think second round, I think Miocic is a very intelligent fighter. I think he's going to know enough to stay out of reach of Ngannou. There's going to be a point where he is going to have to engage Ngannou, and I think Ngannou is much more prepared. I think if you look at DC in his first fight, he did a really good job of using the jab to keep in the middle, keeping Miocic or Stipe at bay. I think Ngannou is I think he's learned a lot from the last fight, but I also think the fact that he has fought a smaller individual who I think is not as good a fighter as Ngannou over the last 3 years, I think that's a big factor for me because he's not had the same experience that Ngannou has in the ring with the diversity of characters, and he's just doesn't have the time in the ring. I think that's going to have a huge impact on this.
So I would challenge you on that. DC would be recognized as one of the greatest UFC fighters of all time. He's up there. He lost to arguably the greatest John Jones and now Stipe. So those two, you could argue, Stipe is argued as one of the greatest of all time. So if they're fighting each other, 2 of 3 people in like the debate of, okay, I don't think anyone's debating DC is the greatest of all time, but he is right up there. Francis Ngannou's competition, I don't think you could class in the same league as that. So he's been fighting, I'm going to put in air quotes here, inferior competition, but he's done it emphatically.
So, and this isn't me saying, I'm saying in this comparison, I think Ngannou, and I'm not talking because I don't know enough about DC's history. I think looking at these fights, those were very good fights between Stipe and DC for the most part. But I look at Ngannou at this stage over the last 3 fights to be the superior opponent. And I think for me, just the time in the ring, the diversity of people that he's been up against. And I think the fact that DC is a smaller individual is going to, it's a complete change in who he's fighting. And I think it's just that diversity and that experience over the last 2 years is going to help Ngannou evolve a bit more. This is that's just why I'm leaning that way. And I think my ignorance to DC might be hampering me here, but I'm still leaning towards that experience piece because that height and reach is, he's been training for the same person for the last 3 years, who's physically a very different fighter. And is DC much of a grappler as well?
Yeah, Olympian wrestler.
Yeah,
yeah. So he's like cream of the crop wrestling, and so the fight when Miocic fought Ngannou to start with, the fight after that for Ngannou was against Derek Lewis, who's the Black Beast. He was on Rogan, by the way, and he was fantastic on that. That was one of the worst heavyweight fights in history because they stood there almost for 3 minutes and no one. That
was the
shot.
Fight you were talking about. Yeah,
that is embarrassing. Right now, DC fought Derek Lewis and mopped him up very much like Stipe did. He wrestled him. He wrestled a guy to the ground and manhandled him and won the title. It was boring, but he did what needed to get done because, like Ngannou, it's like the same thing. Ngannou and Derek Lewis, you do not want to get punched by them. You don't want to get touched. But Stipe and DC used the same tactic. They took this big guy down and just overwhelmed them. So you could say that Ngannou fought Derek Lewis and lost on the decision of a terrible fight that they were both losers, really. And Derek Lewis is embarrassed by that fight, by the way. But DC was able to overwhelm Derek Lewis. So again, it's UFC maths. It's like, well, he beat him, therefore he beats him. It never works out like that. But you probably are undercutting DC's effectiveness. But I would say that I can hear what you're saying. Miocic has been focusing on a person that's very different, a different skill set, different size, different frame for 3 years. And you're saying that Francis has gone, had to deal with different types of characters and different skill sets. And there's a strength to that. And I think there's an acknowledgement from me of that. I think you might be over-egging it, but I still don't know that either. And I think it's a fair point you're bringing to the table.
I'm going to stick to my guns on that one. I was so taken back by how I've never seen a fighter, and I was impressed with Usman when we watched him. I became a fan of Jan, just the personality and the skill, and just the just how tidy everything was with him. But with Ngannou, it was with every fight that I watched, the last 4 fights I watched, it was when he connected, it was one connection, and it was just like. That every time in those 3 fights, it was that one punch. There was a wobble, and he was in like that. He's quick, and if he can stay out of reach, and I think the secret to him is to just stay the fuck away.
Take down defense.
Just stay out of it. Just jump, run like hell, and then counter. And I think he's in with a shot. Because I think the one thing I will say, when you compare Jan, who's a lighter guy, to Stipe, Stipe moves actually better. I think I would say he's got a little bit more agility than Jan does. When you watch him fight, not much, but he has deceptive quickness, I think. And as long as Ngannou is prepared to stay the fuck away, I think he's all right. But it has to be second round for him. He's got to catch him in the second round.
Mate, look, this is what I love about the UFC. I'm saying I'm back in Stipe. I'm leaning Stipe. Let me be clear, because I could totally see Ngannou winning.
I'm leaning,
and the bookies have got, I think, Ngannou. So Stipe again is the underdog, which has made me think you cannot bet against Stipe as an underdog. He keeps on coming back and beating people. And let me just preface this with something else now, Sean, that now supposedly the winner of this is going to fight John Jones, who people argue, along with Khabib, who we're going to touch on in a minute, as the greatest of all time. So John's coming up to heavyweight. He's been piling on the pounds with some powerlifting and bodybuilding, and supposedly he's going to be taking on the winner of this. So it's one to watch and keep an eye out for, because there's a nice little story follow-up. If Miocic takes down Ngannou and he just does something similar to the first fight, I don't think they're going to be fighting again. But if Ngannou beats him, you've either got a rematch, or you've got John Jones coming in the mix, which John Jones taking on either of those two is going to be exciting. So I can't wait.